Welcome to Crappy Reviews. I'm Chris.
And I'm Rob. Today, Chris and I are giving up quality crochet time with Elgin and Tilly to talk about From Season 2, Episode 9, Balls of Magic Fire. We'll do a quick recap of the episode to start, but we'll be diving into the faraway tree of speculation right after. Check the timestamps on YouTube to jump straight to the theories. So we open the episode, and Paula has basically exploded in her sleep, but was repeating the limerick, they touch, they break, they steal, no one here is free. When she's found, the cicadas are gone, though, after we heard them at the end of the last episode. We established that it's no longer safe to go to sleep, and that we wanted everyone to be notified, i.e. Jim and Randall out at the RV, Colony House. This gets Boyd out to the RV. Randall thinks that Donna is a part of everything going on because of seeing them disposing of Smiley's body at the clinic, and to prove a point, he throws the keys away to keep everyone overnight at the RV. Back in town, the Matthews are staying in with Tien Chan, Victor, and Jade to hopefully all stay awake, and Kenny stays with Sarah at the post office/jail. Through their conversations, Sarah mentions that maybe the being is feeding off more than pain because Nathan was terrified of cicadas, and potentially that people who have died could have their nightmares show up in town, which we'll discuss more later. At Colony House, they're also pairing off to stay awake, which leads to Christy taking Mari to the room to work through withdrawals, the room that was clearly used for people before that had shown up and had not taken the information well due to the straps on the bed. At the RV, now that they've been stuck there, Boyd takes to making silver bullets with the bile by dripping some onto some of the bullets that he has for his gun. Through some arguments, Boyd threatens Randall and tells him that he can be the one to go outside and shoot the monsters, and brings up a very important question, I think, and asks if he still thinks that this is a game. Again, back at Colony House, Christy and Ellis are having a conversation about Fatima's pregnancy, to which she uses a metaphor that the sun is a magic ball of fire, something that is so weird but we've just become so used to, possibly being a bigger metaphor for the town itself. Tabitha and Jade have a conversation about how Eloise's drawings were all from Eloise and Victor's mom's stories, which leads her to ask the question of what if the children are asking her for help. Also in the house, Ethan makes a very strong point that he no longer likes the story or believes in the story of the Cromanocle and doesn't want to play any games that night. At the RV, the monsters are starting to close in, but stop when the music from the music box starts playing over the radio inside the RV that Jim had been working on. Again, jumping back to the post office, Sarah tries to have a moment with Kenny, but he is definitely over it, and she decides that she's going to take action and possibly play some Russian roulette. Again, jumping back to the RV, we've been jumping back a lot and forth this episode. Something is making a noise from under the RV when the music stops on the radio. When this happens, Randall bolts out one window, leaving the others to fend for themselves and go to the van out the other side. However, Boyd is called back into the RV and sees Abby standing in the RV, where she says, "Come back to me." Back at Colony House, we do see Elgin and Tilly crocheting, where Tilly brings up to Fatima that she knows she is pregnant, quote unquote, because she has had 4 children and 7 grandkids. Christy and Mari are in the room to deal with her withdrawals, but she is tied to the bed when Christy leaves. At this moment, we see the cicadas come through the window and infest into Mari. At the same time, Elgin remembers his dream from the bus due to Tilly mentioning the pregnancy. And it was the boy in white repeating the second half of "Here they come for 3 unless you stop the melody," which reminds Bacta that her grandmother used to sing that limerick as well, and she knew the entire song. We close the episode on seeing Julie in the house, reacting in a way that looks like she's seeing the cicadas as well. We don't see it as the fans, but I think it's safe to assume that's where we're ending on this episode.
All right, now that we have the context for this week's episode, it's time for our crappy reviews. What rating are we giving episode 9? Rob, I'm let you go first.
I have to go 9.5, I think.
Wow.
I really want to go 10. I know we talked about it before a little bit about feeling like there could be that last little step to get to a 10 from. Obviously, we're judging this against other From episodes, but I really liked this episode. I felt like there was a lot of meat to it. There have been some times where there's some moments in episodes where there's a little bit of filler for some plot and things like that, but this was just gung-ho all the way through. I was very excited about this episode, more than usual.
Yeah, I think I'm in agreement. I'll give you a 9.5 as well. I think we think the same thing. So this episode had a lot of horror elements. It was kind of edge of your seat. It was kind of scary, the RV parts and inside the house. And what makes it extra scary and why I think I really like this one the most so far was how it was an unknown agent attacking people. The last respite you have is to be in the house and asleep, and it's gone. And now even parts of it when people weren't asleep. So the horror, how they jumped the horror up in this episode, I think pushed me really close to a 10 because I really, really enjoyed it.
I definitely agree. I also wanted to call out in this episode, I know last episode we mentioned Victor's actor and his great job of Scott McCord, the acting job he did in the last episode. I wanted to give a shout out this week to Avery Conrad, who is Sarah in the show. I think her scene with Kenny when she's trying to apologize, and I'll say she finally snaps a little bit. Not that she gets angry, but she starts to fight back a little bit in terms
less of a pity party.
Correct. Yeah. She's trying to put her emotions out there and be like, look, I understand that you'll never appreciate my apology, but this is where I'm at. And I think there was just a lot of emotion in that scene, especially to your point when a lot of the episode was so horror based. There was a lot of emotion in that scene, and I think she led a lot of it. I think Kenny did a good job in that scene, but a lot of that was based on her ability to really sell how strongly she was feeling in that moment. And I think that was my one really big acting and kind of TV show call out for this week.
I agree 100%. Every now and then you get a spark from one of them, especially like the more veteran crew that's been there since the beginning. And she definitely did a nice job that time. It drew you into the scene, and it gave Kenny something to work with because like you said, he did well, and it gave him a little bit of, something to bounce back from.
So that brings us to the perfect place to start our speculation session. Sarah has a second in-show theory that we've experienced, which is that potentially they're not drawing off the pain of the From folk, but the fears. Chris, what do you think?
Specifically, what Sarah had said was that the forest is using the nightmares of the people that are killed to then attack the townsfolk. So she brought up Nathan's intense fear of cicadas, and then lo and behold, cicadas are all over the place, causing problems. I think this kind of lines up with what me and you, I think most people that are watching and reviewing the show, or at least on Reddit and other forums like that, are talking about. We knew that it was fear-based. The show made it pretty clear that with all the phobias out there that they were kind of knocking them out one by one. We had brought it up before. So I think although this might not explain how the forest is doing it and if there's an entity doing more to create the drama, it's definitely in line with what we all think is happening. And I think they gave us a big piece to lead us that way. We all complain we don't get enough information throughout the show, but I think this might have given us a nice, good clue on kind of what's happening out there. I believe what she's saying to a certain extent.
Yeah, I want to also add that I think Nathan's fear is fully justified because I am slightly terrified of cicadas because they are just so big. And the scenes where the cicadas start crawling up the bodies of everyone that they're going after, just that sent me into a fever. That terrified me. So I fully do not blame him on that. I do agree. Like you said, we've talked about it before. The From Twitter account themselves, they tweet the videos of this is this phobia, this is this phobia. I do hope that this gives us answers in the future. I think you're right that it's at least getting us on the right path where we've had so many questions for so long. This is the first step towards finding out real answers potentially.
I agree 100%. So speaking of the cicadas attacking people, we had Mari, Julie, and Randall. Now, Randall we know is attacked by cicadas. Mari we know is attacked by cicadas, at least in her mind, because they weren't there when people walked in. But we don't know exactly what happened to Julie. But based off her scraping at her body and having those general, motions, we think it's probably cicadas as well. And most likely Randall, if people would have walked up to him in the woods, would not have seen the cicadas. So are these the three people that the nursery rhyme is talking about?
I think they definitely are. I think the one piece that I'm still trying to piece together potentially is are the they touch, they break, they steal. Is that talking about all of them as a whole? Is that talking about potentially each one of them? Are they fitting some kind of role? Kind of like what we've talked about. I know a big piece of both of our thoughts on this show is that there could be roles that they're filling for the game that's being played, and that to the same point with this nursery rhyme, this limerick. They touch, they break, they steal. They're coming for 3. That's 3 things that they named. Are there attributes that these people have that caused them to be the ones to be taken over? Because I think we've talked about it before. I can't say I'm surprised that Randall was attacked, if you will. Mari, definitely not. I know there's been lots of rumors that, or not rumors, but speculation that maybe when Boyd was in the clinic, somehow the worms got into Mari. People were thinking that could have been a thing. I think that's definitely not the case now. But is there a reason these 3? I do think it is the 3. And I guess I'm at the point where I'm now trying to look at, is there something else within the limerick that points to them specifically, right? So they touch, they break, they steal. Is Mari stealing? We did have the very specific scene where she steals the morphine earlier. They touch, they break. Is there something that Randall is touching or breaking? Maybe it's just Randall breaking the relationships with people in the town. Who knows? But I think they definitely are. And that is going to be obviously a huge focus in episode 10, I think, because that's going to be what a lot of people are really looking at with Julie and Mari specifically, trying to figure out what's happening.
Yeah, I agree. To be honest with you, I didn't think about that until you just brought it up, but it makes a good point that we keep associating they with the monsters or something coming from the forest, but it could just be describing attributes of the people, of the 3 that they're going after. And it would make a lot of sense that, because those 3 in particular, the other one, Paula, the one that just got busted wide open at the face there from the cicadas.
You called her walnut face.
Walnut face, because she just got cracked open like a walnut. She was asleep and was killed. And this happened to someone else, right? Was there someone else that was killed by the cicadas?
No, because it was they came out of Mr. Smiley.
That's what it was. Yeah, saw
in the episode with her.
Right. So only one other person was killed. The other 3 aren't really killed. It looks like Mari went to some sort of trance coma-like state. Her eyes kind of roll back. And Boyd makes the point to say she's still breathing, yada, yada, yada. And Julie looks like she was about to kind of go into the same kind of coma state. Randall, we assumed he was dead, but obviously he's probably just laying out there in the woods. And the monsters aren't going to attack him because they seem to stop knowing that like the next part of the plan was being enacted, and they were just kind of there to stand back and watch. So yeah, I think you're right. I like your theory on this. I think that's probably a better way to look at it than the monsters being the they. With that said, what's good or bad? What happened in the RV? The vision of Abby. We've seen Abby twice now. He's had 2 visions of Abby. One, I believe, at the spider tree, and then the one in the latest episode. And we've also had Sarah reference Abby in the walk to the spider tree, I think in episode 10 of season 1 or episode 9, where Mr. Fish and Loaves tell him I was wrong. Right, we're assuming referring to her dream. And we had Martin refer to her asking if she was right. Is the Abby that we're seeing, in your opinion, the Abby? And if so, is she good or bad? I think it is her. I think the way that she showed up in the last episode with like the flickering lights, it wasn't the same as how the other negative entities seem to be showing up. So I think it is her.
So let me ask you a follow-up question to that then. Do you think, this is kind of very specific, but to your point, this is the second time she's shown up. Do you think this is the same kind of vision? Where the one that he saw, the version of her that he saw in the spider tree, when she's caught up in the spider webs, do you think this is I'll say the same Abby? I know that's kind of, obviously we're getting into a real ethereal plane here in terms of, constructs, but do you think it's the same one? Does that make sense?
No, I don't think they're all the same. I think that the forest, and I'm going to say the forest here, just so everyone's listening, is kind of just referring to the entity, that the forest itself being this place that's creating illusions or monsters or whatever. The one that we saw in the spider tree, I don't think was her. I think the one that talked to Sarah was her. And I think the one that we saw recently was her. I think that she is able to pop up. And that leads into a whole bunch of other things about is this heaven or hell and purgatory and stuff, because you could potentially be seeing dead people. But it brings up a Randall point too, where the people actually dead. Now, she was shot and killed. and not eaten by a monster. So that kind of changes her trajectory in the show. But yeah, I think that some of them are her.
So I think that's a valid point. I think when you initially posed the question, my initial thought was that I mentioned before that I think Father Khatri could be a representation of one of these forces, that who Boyd is seeing as his conscience, that he thinks he's seeing as his conscience, is a representation of one of them. And that my initial reaction is that this embodiment of Abby is the other side, if you will. You've kind of got Father Khatri always wearing black. You see Abby with this kind of light. She's wearing
right
colors, and it's supposed to be kind of these dichotomy possibly. So I think that's where my mind goes first, but that will be hopefully soon to be found out. I would love to know the answer to that.
I think what we're seeing from Father Khatri is more of an embodiment of what Boyd's psyche is doing, more of a Jiminy Cricket-like character, where it's his conscious working through some problems. I think what we're seeing from Abby is probably more of a real manifestation of something, whether it's good or evil from the forest or spiritual, but it's not out of Boyd's mind.
So speaking of good or evil, or good or bad, I'll phrase it a little more differently there, good or bad. We do see them try the silver bullets in this episode. Doesn't appear that they worked. I will say it doesn't appear because it did take a second for Mr. Smiley to go down after he was cut and introduced with Boyd's blood.
And potentially a lot lower dose.
Very much. Yeah, definitely a lot less. So I think there is a part of me that has not written off the idea that they worked, but I do believe that they didn't, just off initial reaction. And I know you don't believe that they worked either, but for a specific reason.
Yeah, I don't think they worked, and I don't think they worked because the bile, I feel, is medicinal, or maybe not so much medicinal, because that makes it, comes across a little differently, but definitely more of a defensive weapon than it would be an offensive weapon. I think that the worms cured Boyd of Parkinson's. I think they kept Martin alive for, according to some people on Reddit, his tattoo is really, really old based on the design of the marine tattoo. So we could be talking 120 or 130 years old. And he did look old, but obviously as soon as they came out, he just dropped dead. So I think the bile is something that we're going to see in the next episode to bring people back out of their coma, for the lack of a better word. I don't think it's there to kill the monsters. I think it's something that they can use to protect them from what's ever trying to invade them. So I think it's more of a defensive weapon or more of a medicinal property because it kept people alive. And it was, when the worms were real, they were able to kill a monster and not kill a human. So there's obviously some sort of physiological difference, and it's not innately bad for humans to have in their body. That's what I think.
Yeah, I think this is something that hadn't gone through my mind until you kind of mentioned it to me offline, and I know we wanted to touch on it. So every week we also have to make sure we touch on Victor's section.
Oh, Victor.
Okay, I'm going to throw this out there now. I think we can all chill out a little bit because after last week's episode, everybody and their friggin' brother initial thought was, oh man, Victor can't go in the house. Why can't Victor go in anybody's house? He walked in with Jade pretty normally when they all showed up there, when it was all, hey, we got to partner up and make sure nobody goes to sleep. It looked to me like he walked in just fine. So I think we can all kind of chalk that up to a Victor quirk.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I don't think there's much more to say about it. He seemed to be just fine. He's not a vampire. He was just probably uncomfortable with the situation at the time.
Yeah, I think something that I completely missed on, I'll kind of amend last week's, was that I think the point that I know Tabitha had Victor's help, so she was on a little bit better terms, but yeah, Jim has never been a huge fan of Victor, and he thinks there's something a little weird there, so he probably did just feel uncomfortable going into Jim's house. That being said, once they are in the house, we have the very stirring conversation where Ethan just goes full punk rock and decides to throw everything. He's throwing everything at the wall. But Victor does say a couple very poignant things in this conversation when Ethan mentions that everyone died when Victor was a kid. Victor mentions very specifically that it won't happen like that again. And he also mentions that his mother used to always say that everything is a story and we get to decide how it ends, which I think is also a very telling piece, because Tabitha mentions how all of the pictures that Eloise drew came from their mother's stories. So, Chris, let me ask you this first. When he says it won't happen like that again, do you think that's him hoping, or do you think there is a chance he might actually know something?
I think he knows. I think, so there's a poll on the YouTube channel, how much Victor knows. And I think Victor knows probably 75%. I think he's seen enough to know that the different cycles end in different ways, and that maybe even the players that caused the massacre during his time period and kind of what happened. So I think Victor is aware it won't happen again like that. He doesn't say it won't happen again in general. He just says it won't happen like that again, leaving it open-ended that like this could go down as another massacre, another purge. It's just not going to look like that, because maybe, and I'll tell you why, now that we're going back to Sarah's theory, different people at the time had different nightmares and fears, causing different plagues, for a lack of a better phrase, to come out of the forest. So in reality, every cycle would probably have a different ending, because the group of people you have, the sample set, is going to have generally different fears. So you might get a different ending to the game every time.
So you saying that has actually just said something, you triggered something in my head. Him saying everything is a story and we get to decide how it ends. Is that potentially kind of the dichotomy of that, where yes, these are our own fears that we have to deal with, but at the same time, to your point, it's not going to happen like that again. But it's still going to happen, but we get to decide how it ends because this is a separate story. It's not, or am I just grasping at straws now because I'm trying to piece stuff together?
So I think when Victor says everything is a story and we get to decide how it ends, he says it positively. And I'm not sure if that was just to make Ethan feel better because he's a younger kid and Victor was trying to make him feel better for the situation because you could tell he was in distress, or if he really believes that we get to decide and these are just trials and tribulations along the way. And if we play the game correctly, we could end. Because if we remember, Victor's mom seemed to have an escape route, an exit route. She, said, we're going to get out of here and I'm going to go save the kids. So there may be a way out. He might know of a way, maybe not how to do it, but he knows that you could get out and the story will end differently. But he says it positively. Whether or not he meant it or if it was just empathy, I don't know. But I'm leaning towards more of it's actually a positive message than it was just making Ethan feel better. Speaking of empathy, it looks like Christy was talking to Ellis to get him through his nervousness about Fatima's pregnancy, which is totally understandable. And especially living in that particular town, I could see why he's on edge. That's as being that she couldn't get pregnant, then she could. So in order to make him feel a little better and just try to get him kind of from a 10,000 foot view of how wild pregnancy is and all the things that happen, how it's just kind of a wild thing and we're just so used to it that we think nothing of it. She brings up the ball of magic fire metaphor. That's basically saying our existence just floating around a giant magic ball of fire is so wild and weird, but we just gotten used to it because there's no other way to look at life. It was her attempt to kind of calm Ellis down and just pull him out of his own body and say, look, everything's weird. This is weird. Our existence is weird. We've been doing this for a long time. Don't worry about it. What is interesting in this particular spot, though, is she gives us a time frame for how pregnant she is. I think it was 6 weeks. So
around 6 weeks.
Yeah. Anytime they give us a time frame, whether it be this time frame or when Mari tells her she's been gone for 6 months and she's only just under 2 hours away, things like that, examples like that throughout the show, there should be something to be paid attention to. Whether or not we have an expedited pregnancy because everything seems to heal faster there is something that could happen. Whether or not they're just doing that so when season 3 comes out and she's, fully pregnant or already had the kid, we kind of know about how long they've been there. I don't really know, but they did give us a time frame. More than that is, Rob, what do you think Ball of Magic Fire refers to in reference to the show? Obviously, it means what she said, but they didn't just name the show that for shits and giggles. There's a point to it.
Yeah. I think this is definitely one of those metaphors that would have been well suited in the episode. obviously, to meet what Ellis is going through, but to then, escalate that and make that the title of the episode, especially when there were so many other things that happened, right? Like, you have the whole thing that happens in the RV. There's just so much that was almost an inconsequential scene comparatively. It kind of goes back to where I mentioned in the last episode where Ellis didn't have the chance to tell Boyd about the pregnancy in episode 8. And you don't set a scene up like that in such a jam-packed 45, 50 minutes of TV unless there's like a payoff at some point. So I think that kind of stuck with me again on this. And I think that it's just a bigger metaphor for the town as a whole. So I don't know what the answer is to that just yet, because I think there are we still have so many clues. We still have so many loose ends that we need to tie together in terms of what's going on. And I almost wonder if this ball of magic fire metaphor is so many people have just become complacent with what happens in the town. They know the monsters come out at night. They know that the power comes from nowhere, right? That everybody's just used to it now. So potentially it's more of a foreboding thing where she mentions everybody's just used to it, but now we see things changing, right?
Right.
We had Victor mentioning the trees changing. We've got the nightmare on From Street.
Mm-hmm.
We've got
the whole dynamic.
These cicadas where people are getting taken over by these beings these entities that we're still not entirely sure. Obviously, they came from the monsters because they came from Mr. Smiley, but what that changing of the town, I think, is almost being foreshadowed by her saying it's just a ball of magic fire and we're just used to it, right? And that the town, it almost became comfortable to a lot of people because as long as you were inside with the talisman, you were good. But now we're seeing these changes that have major consequences for everyone involved.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a pretty good way of looking at it. It's just an analogy for change that's happening in the town.
And I think another thing I want to bring up real quick that you mentioned offline, but I think could be something just to keep an eye on. I don't know if we need to go deep into it, but obviously with these fears being played off of, does Ellis have a fear of pregnancy? Or even Fatima, right? We're kind of being set up a little bit to how obviously this pregnancy is going to be a huge deal for the entire town, but are there underlying parts to that as well, right? We see these fears coming true. Is one of them scared of the pregnancy? And, where could that go potentially?
Yeah, Ellis had brought up some fears for the pregnancy, and he brought up a demonic Rosemary's Baby-like situation. So the question is, I guess for me, if Ellis was to die by the monsters, I'm assuming you have to die from the town for the town to absorb your nightmare. I'm kind of just spitballing, but I think that's probably how it works. If he was to get killed by a monster or some town-like thing tomorrow, would that put into motion a Rosemary's Baby situation for Fatima? If he was to die and his greatest fears and nightmares are related to the pregnancy, how that affects the pregnancy? I think that would be an interesting way to go about it. And one more thing with the pregnancy I want to bring up, Tilly the mole, because Tilly comes up and starts talking about the pregnancy like she knows things. No one else knows. I don't know how Tilly knows. She stirs up more low-key drama.
Because she has 4 children and 7 grandchildren.
Whatever. It's because she has 4 molars and 7 grand moles. That's the problem. And she comes in with her low-key drama again. Sweet older lady. And
just trying to hang out and crochet.
But here's the real thing, too. She, in my opinion, has too much screen time for a character of her stature in the show. So you already said the show's jam-packed, 45-minute episode, just, wall-to-wall action. And then we take a minute for a crochet session with Tilly to drop some drama. She obviously has a bigger role than what she's playing out to be. Whether or not she's a mole, because I'm being a little facetious in that respect, she definitely plays a bigger role. And she's doing the grandma role that Ellis talked about in the church with Sarah. She's either, to your point, filling a role, or she's like the antithesis of his grandma, the opposite of his grandma stepping in. I don't know.
Well, I do think, again, to call out your screen time argument, when they're going through the explanation of everyone wanting to be kept awake because of what's going on, she keeps getting these camera shots kind of going by. They're going to Ellis, they're going to Elgin, they're going to Fatima. They're explaining what's going on. You've got Reggie losing his ever-loving mind trying to explain it, but they keep focusing on Tilly, which is odd because don't get me wrong, there aren't a ton of other main characters at Colony House at that point where you're going to have, screen time on. But for somebody who hasn't even been in the show for over an episode until now, you're getting a lot of face time. I would equate it to in the scene when Mari and Christy are in the room before the cicadas come in. In my head the whole time, I'm thinking something's going to come through the window because they kept framing the window with the shots. It was never leaving the camera shot, so something's going to happen. It's getting you on edge for it. And it almost feels the same way with Tilly, except it's almost like they're trying to lull you into it with her being this sweet older grandmother figure. Just didn't seem the most present when she came in with her stories and how she was acting. She didn't seem like that type of person.
So speaking of Mari in that scene, after they framed the window and the cicadas came through, prior to the cicadas coming through, she was saying something's in the room, and it wasn't a cicada. Because when they do a cicada dance, they're swiping at their skin, swiping at their clothes. You can tell they have like a bug on them in their mind. But this was her swiping more at like a person or a thing in the room. She didn't tell us what it was. Do you think she saw someone that we know in the room? Do you think it was just more cicadas? What is it she saw in the room with her prior to the cicadas?
So the only thing I will say is my mind immediately went to the ballerina again, but we didn't see it, so we don't know. I will also use one quick, very direct point that I actually found out through Tara Matharu again, the man who went on Reddit and posted the theory that I've adopted as my favorite and kind of added a little bit to, was that Mari, the actress who plays Mari, specifically seeks out roles where she gets to use her dance training. So there, to me, seems like there could be some kind of connection with the ballerina. Now that's looking really far into it. Don't get me wrong. That's like casting off the books back kind of stuff. But she specifically seeks out these roles where she can dance and has done ballet before. And there seems to be a weird connection there. And knowing that the ballerina shows up in these kind of instances, it was where my mind went just immediately about possibly something being.
Okay. That's a fair point.
And speaking of other things that we've seen online and called out, there was one that we had in the comments of our last video, thanks to Jason Caldwell, that I thought was a really good point that I really liked, also because Halloween is like my favorite time of year. So he made a good point that in the schoolhouse, the rooms seem to be decorated to Halloween or almost like a Halloween dance. And maybe the monsters are actually the people that were there that were in a costume, which would explain the milkman, the cowboy. There's one guy that I think just looks like a knockoff Dracula.
In the last episode, next to the grandma, right on the right?
Correct.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's him.
So we're seeing them that could be in these costumes, which I think was a great call out because I love the Halloween decorations just because I love those old Halloween aesthetics. But putting it together that way makes a lot more sense than me just liking the Halloween decorations. So I wanted to call that out. And I actually think that leads into another piece that Chris has picked up on that we want to call out probably before we get out of here.
Yeah, we were pouring through some photos about a week ago because we're always digging for more Easter eggs. And I noticed that Christie's EMT uniforms for paramedics and EMTs aren't the same thing. So when you look at a paramedic uniform, you're going to get a couple things. You're going to get a badge of the town or city or province or state that they're doing the service in. You're going to get something that says paramedic. And then in the front, it's going to be like a name tag or something to that effect. What you're not going to get is an EMT and a paramedic with no location badge on the side. Because I pulled up quite a few and none of them were like that. So I made the comment that it seems like they're wearing costumes, that none of this is real. And I didn't know why yet, but Jason's point rings true that maybe they were just wearing costumes and she found one. That goes into say that we looked into Kenny and Boyd's badges because I'm trying maybe we get some information from the badges. Rob poured through all 50 states.
I combed through all 50 state trooper badges. Thank you to the Animaniacs for teaching me the states in order by alphabet, by the way. And couldn't find a good match on that either. So
it leads to this idea of it being some costumes left over, and that would kind of lean into Jason's theory.
So yeah, we definitely appreciate the call out on that. I know there was a lot more to that too, but that one definitely stuck with me. So also, that being said, if you're watching the video and you love this kind of stuff, go through the comments too. Add your own comments, read through them, comment on other people's, because there's a lot going on in these theories from this show.
I think I'm kind of good on most of my speculations. I have one more that people should probably think about. Why did the music come through the radio and not through a music box? It seemed to be in reality and not in a vision. Everyone heard it, but but there was no music box to be seen. So that's probably something to come up. And one more point that I think is interesting is that when you look at the posters for From, I believe the Brazilian poster, it uses a different word, but the word means origin and not from. And I had asked Rob before, what does he think about the idea of maybe from is from when and not from where, or from what timeline or what universe you're from, opposed to just where we are on the map, from Kentucky or from Boston or from wherever, like a destination. So something to think about.
So that's going to do it for this episode. But before we go, we want to leave you with our question of the week. Do you agree with Chris that the bile will turn out to be a medicinal tool more than a weapon?
To answer the question, leave a review on Spotify, drop a comment under this YouTube video, or find us on Twitter at crappy_reviews and let us know your answer. And while you're there, don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow to join us on future episodes. Thank you for listening to Crappy Reviews with Chris and Rob, and we'll catch you on the flippity flop.